If you have any type of anxiety, you are probably very familiar with waking up with a nagging sense that something big is about to go wrong, even when everything seems fine. That's the grip of anticipatory anxiety, turning a hopeful morning into a cascade of what ifs. Welcome to your anxiety toolkit. Today, we're peeling back the layers on anticipatory anxiety with our special guest, Dr. Sally Winston, a trailblazer in anxiety research and treatment, known for her accessible, jargon-free teaching style that blends current scientific evidence with a deep sense of compassion. She's here to help us decode why our minds sometimes jump ahead into the story of worry. In this episode, we'll cover all the hidden gems and the mechanisms behind anticipatory anxiety and arm you with practical, evidence-based strategies to regain control. Whether you're facing these preemptive fears yourself or supporting someone who is, get ready. This is going to be an enlightening and empowering conversation. So thank you, Sally, for being here.
Well, I'm very glad to be here. That was an amazing introduction. I hope I can live up to it.
I'm sure you will. So here is what we're talking about today. As you can see, when I really love a book, I really tab it up and get it all highlighted and everything. So thank you for writing this. I know you co-wrote it with Dr. Seif.
Yes.
It's amazing.
We do all our writing together. So it's two minds rather than one in the book.
It's amazing. So let's get straight to it. What is anticipatory anxiety?
Well, anticipatory anxiety is actually a transdiagnostic phenomenon. It happens in anxiety disorders, OCD, mood disorders, trauma disorders. It's a kind of anxiety that drives avoidance behavior. It's the anxiety that occurs ahead of time when you are thinking about or anticipating facing a challenge or a decision or something coming up that has caused you trouble of one way or another in the past. And so it is the anxiety that happens before the event.
Mm, mm. It really is a different way of framing anxiety because more often than not, anxiety is about something that hasn't happened yet.
Mm-hmm.
And you talk in the book about the brain and what's going on in the brain step by step. Would you be able to share what is actually happening in the brain when someone is experiencing anxiety and anticipatory anxiety?
I'll do my best in ordinary language. I'm not sure that I understand it in more than ordinary language myself, but we have the alarm center of the brain, which is the amygdala and the limbic system that is run by it. And we have the incoming way station called the thalamus, which is where the information from our senses comes from. What happens when you see something that is potentially dangerous or distressing? The information comes in through your senses and it goes to your thalamus. Then the thalamus has two routes that get it to the thalamus. One is called, this is the work of Du. It goes through the lower and the higher level. It goes through a fast, direct route straight from the thalamus to the amygdala, which is your fight or flight response, your alarm. But there's another route that is actually a little bit slower through the cortex that goes from the thalamus through the cortex where we do our thinking in the frontal lobe and are evaluating. And then that goes to the thalamus. And what we know is that the route straight to the alarm is faster than the route that goes through our thinking. So the example that is always given is that you're walking along a path and you see a long, thin thing and you jump back and then you go, oh, it's a stick.
Mm.
not a snake, right? So you get your alarm before you get your chance to evaluate it by milliseconds, but it is ahead of time. One of the things that happens with our alarm system is the more sensitized we are and the more anxious we are, the more likely it is that that alarm system through the cortex, the slower one, becomes more active. And something that can set off the alarm from the cortex to the alarm system doesn't have to come through the thalamus. It doesn't have to come through our senses. It can just come through our imagination.
Mm.
So our thoughts can set off the alarm, the exact same alarm as an actual tiger running after you or truck about to smash into you. Your own thoughts can give you exactly the same feeling. And so anticipatory anxiety is the anxiety that happens when you're not actually in danger at all. There's no sensory information coming in that says you're in danger. It's just your own thoughts. And it
Yeah.
can set off something that feels exactly the same.
And that's where it's so interesting. And I loved that you went through that and discussed that piece because I think so many people can understand that our brains can almost project up onto like the screen of our mind the worst
Mhm.
case scenario, the catastrophe. And it can
Right.
feel like it's actually really happening. Like it can feel like we're in that danger in that moment.
Right. It feels the same. It's the same experience when we go deliberately to a horror movie in order to experience fear while having one foot in the theater, right? Where
Yes.
we know that it's not actually dangerous, and yet your heart's pounding and you're breathing fast and you're trying not to look and you're having the same alarm system experience, except a part of you knows that it's not real. And
Yes.
that's the deliberate use of our imagination for fear, for fun. The context is we asked for it.
Yeah. So why does our brain do this? Why do some of us have this and some of us don't?
Well, everybody has the capacity for anticipatory anxiety. It's not something that is unique to people with anxiety disorders by any means.
Okay,
Um,
good.
People get caught up in anticipatory anxiety if they overinterpret its meaning. So if you have a spout of doubt or what if or worry about something that's coming up, it's how you relate to that that makes the big difference. It is your relationship with that experience. If you go, oh, well, of course I'm a little anxious, and you don't care about it, you don't interpret anticipatory anxiety as a warning or a signal or a prediction. It doesn't tell you how it's really going to go. It's your imagination. It's not facts. It's not reading the future. But if you interpret it as oh, you better not, or what if this is real, or maybe if you feel this bad 3 months ahead of time, it'll be even worse the closer you get to it and it's not worth it. Whatever it is, it's your interpretation and reaction to to the anticipatory anxiety that turns it into a problem.
Mm, yeah. And
Because
you
if you start thinking anxiously about the anxiety, you start making big distortions. You start thinking, for example, that the thought's important, or that thinking about it can make it happen, or that somehow when you get anxious about that, your capacity to think about risk goes completely haywire. Or you end up, because it is a possibility that you've thought of, suddenly it starts feeling like a probability or a likelihood. It feels like now you're responsible to do something about it just because you thought ahead of time about it now you're something in your hands that says, okay, well, now you've got to prepare, or you've got to avoid, or you've got to at least think about and analyze and worry about and take care now because you had this thought.
Yeah. You talk about and this I have so many questions I want to ask because you've given us so many great areas here already. But you also talk about anticipatory being the fear of fear.
Mm-hmm.
Can you share a little more about that? So let's say I have social anxiety and the fear is that I'll be judged.
Mm-hmm.
Where would anticipatory anxiety be in that sequence?
Okay, so let's say you say, I'm scared to go to this party. So that's the first level. The second level is, what if I go to the party and I try to talk to someone and I start blushing and stammering and fumbling and I give myself a panic attack and I humiliate myself and I can't stand it and I won't be able to go to any parties after that because of how terrible it is. That's the second level of fear. The third level of fear is, oh my God, I'm thinking about all that stuff. It feels really terrible even right now while I'm thinking about it. And that party isn't even until next week. I wonder if I should come up with a migraine so that I can avoid it.
Yes. And I love that you broke that down because sometimes we're just like blanket statement, it's all fear. And that deeper understanding I know for my clients and for myself, knowing those layers of fear really helps me to feel like I'm getting a grasp and understanding it. And then I can kind of disentangle from it a little easier.
I love that you're using the word disentangle because that's one of the attitude shifts that our work really emphasizes is that anticipatory anxiety is basically an illusion that we get all entangled with, right? It's stuff in our heads. It's not actually happening. And yet we treat it as if it's a real thing and we get absorbed in it and we think about it and we react to it and we make a big thing out of it when it's really an illusion.
Mm.
So I'm glad you used that word.
Yeah, no, it was so cool to read because I've read some of your other books, which we can talk about later if you like. But this was so cool because it's so much of the language that I do use. You did bring up something that I thought was really interesting, which is you talked about there being um, different types of avoidances. And I wondered if you could share. You mentioned that there were two specific types, and I thought that was an interesting way of conceptualizing avoidance that I hadn't heard.
Well, I think you're referring to behavioral avoidance and experiential
Yes.
avoidance.
Yes.
Yeah. Behavioral avoidance is stuff you do or don't do in the real world, and experiential avoidance is things you do in your mind to keep yourself from having the experience of anxiety. And they're all avoidance, and there's partial versions of everything, but
Mm.
it's a different thing to decide not to go somewhere because you think you're going to get anxious. That's a behavioral avoidance. Or to schedule something and then unschedule it and then schedule it and unschedule it and go through that sort of oscillating avoidance that happens so often. But experiential avoidance is much more subtle because
Mm.
there are ways that people avoid the experience of anxiety even when they're in the situation. So you might be driving and anxious about hitting someone, and you spend the entire time yanking away 9,000 miles an hour to your passengers so that you're not going to think about what if I hit someone. And in your mind, you're saying to yourself, if we hit someone, my passenger will notice and tell me. So you turn the responsibility over. Or perhaps you listen to a podcast and try and block out your thoughts. Or maybe if there's a party that's going to be next week, you pick a fight with the person that you were going to go with, or you have some other subtle way of not experiencing what you're experiencing. Um, it can be as simple as la, 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 trying to get yourself not to have thoughts, or it can be some other very subtle thing. Very often people call them coping skills
Ah,
or tools, but they actually backfire. They don't act, they may work in the moment. Avoidance always works in the moment. It's much faster than Xanax, right? You
mm.
decide not to do something, instantly you feel better.
Yeah.
But then you miss the thing and you feel bad about yourself. But experiential avoidance allows you some temporary relief. But what happens is that it's the equivalent of white knuckling. When you finish, you don't learn anything.
Mhm.
What you learn is I can do it as long as I have this thing that I do, like make sure that I have somebody call me 10 minutes into it so I can get out of it if I have to. And if I have that, then you attribute your ability to get through the experience to your coping skill, and you feel like you need your coping skill, and that's not what happens. It's possible to drive back and forth over the Bay Bridge 50 times in a row. You learn you can drive over the Bay Bridge, but if you're using this kind of experiential avoidance, what you learn is I can do it, but it's horrible. I
Mm.
hate it. It's a
Yeah.
terrible, it doesn't get any better
Yeah.
because you are not letting yourself have the experience. It makes you feel as if you can't handle the experience. And so that does in fact undermine your confidence in the long run.
Yeah. Yeah, you had said, and I actually highlighted it, you said substituting thinking for feeling is a form of anxiety of avoidance. And I highlighted that and thought that's really so true, isn't it? That we often
Yeah.
also sometimes ruminate as a form of avoidance. Would you agree?
Absolutely, because what happens is you're under the illusion that if you just think more and more and more and more, you'll come up with a solution, or you'll figure out why, or you'll analyze yourself into a better spot. And it bears the illusion that you're problem solving, or that you're working on it, or that you're getting ready. And so there's this illusion there, but actually all it does is make you miserable.
Yeah. Is that also true of hypervigilance? Would you put that as an experiential avoidance in that someone's constantly hypervigilant about their surrounding, or would you put that more as a behavioral avoidance, or how would you conceptualize that?
Well, I think hypervigilance can be many different things. It's also a transdiagnostic concept,
Yeah.
right? So that if, for example, you had a traumatic experience, your whole system is going to be hypervigilant, whether you choose it to be or not. You're just going to be sensitized to environments that remind you of the situation, or by physicality or emotion or anything that reminds you in some way of the traumatic experience. Or you can have hypervigilance when you are in fact disabled in some way, and you're trying to be careful for really good reasons. But I think how hypervigilance is that scanning of the environment for possible danger, so that if it is informed by anticipation or imagination, then it becomes problematic. But I think it's more at the front end of the experience. It's more what sets it up
Mm,
than what maintains it.
amazing. Before we get into strategies and tools, and you talked about tools being sometimes an additional experience, like an avoidance, but before we get into some strategies that effectively help for anticipatory anxiety, I wondered if you could talk about being, you mentioned here that some people's biological factors influence anticipatory anxiety, such as being anxiety sensitivity. Can you share what is anxiety sensitivity and how does it relate to this topic?
Anxiety sensitivity is actually a trait. It runs in families. It's actually partly inherited and partly taught. But it actually is partly physically inherited as a predisposition to be afraid of the experience of arousal, whether that is the experience physically or mentally of arousal. So it is the fear of the sensations that come when you're anxious, either the physical sensations or the thoughts and feelings that go with them. And so if you are afraid of arousal, that will set you up for panic. For example, if, say, you're very excited about something, here's an example. I had a patient who had money riding on a football game, loved football games, was watching the football game, got really, really excited because they were about to win a lot of money, and their heart was pounding and pounding, suddenly noticed their heart pounding. This person has high anxiety sensitivity, went, oh, what's this? And then added a panic attack, right? And couldn't even watch the end of the game because he was running around the neighborhood trying to calm down and missed the end of the game. Because what he did was he got so scared of the arousal that he panicked about it. And that's the fear of fear that comes from anxiety sensitivity. So some people are high in that trait, some people are low in that trait. Some people's rapid heartbeat, they don't even notice it. Others notice it but don't care. And other people are very scared of it. And that's just an example of the trait being biologically and psychologically transmitted in your family.
Would you say
But
that
there are,
would
yeah,
you say most people with an anxiety disorder have anxiety sensitivity or no?
yes, most people do, but I wouldn't say, but I think there's a full range of it. A lot of people with OCD are less concerned about the sensations of anxiety than they are about their imaginary possibilities, and they barely pay attention to their bodies. Whereas people with social anxiety, people with panic disorder, and people with GAD sometimes have more of it. But there's a full range within the anxiety disorders. Panic disorder would be the one that's most likely to have high levels of anxiety sensitivity. But there are other things that make you more or less sensitized, and that is anything that is conflictual or is hard on your body will make you more sensitized. So let's say you have a big fight going on with your boss, and every day you're thinking about it and worrying about it. That will raise your level of sensitization. It will make you more likely to feel anxious about driving if that's your thing, right? So it's anything that can sensitize you. We like to say hungry, angry, lonely, tired. Halt to ask yourself, what is going on here that I'm so sensitized that I'm having a harder time with whatever it is my usual stuff is about anxiety, whether it's intrusive thoughts, whether it's phobias, whether it's panic, whatever it is. That's your usual way. For some people, it's a headache or a stomach ache, or for me, it's my right knee because my leg is shorter than my other one. Whatever your anxiety thing is, when you're sensitized, it happens more and it's triggered more easily. But it rarely has anything to do with the phobic object. It's usually you're tired from the night before, maybe you had too many beers, or you're anticipating something that's coming up that's a real either exciting or scary thing, or some other thing is going on that is making you conflicted or stressed or disturbed, or maybe you're grieving. It could be anything.
Yes, so true. Talk to us about strategies. Talk to us about, so we've talked about all the background. If you're someone who struggles with anticipatory anxiety, are you doomed forever, or are there solutions for you? Tell us a little bit about what that trajectory looks like.
Okay. So the first thing I want to say is we're a little bit different from many CBT recommendations because we actually are opposed to techniques.
Mhm.
What this is about is really a shift in perspective and in attitude.
Yes.
It's a shift in your relationship with your own experience. So there are ways to use any coping tools or techniques that you might learn anywhere in a way that's helpful and in a way that's extremely unhelpful and works backwards. So there are many people who try everything you can think of, and chamomile tea and acupuncture and breathing and all kinds of techniques, including telling yourself the right thing to think and telling yourself not to think that because that's the wrong thing to think, and trying to manipulate their internal mind with sort of rational discussion. And none of these things take hold because the perspective and the attitude are not helpful. And so what we talk about is a shift into a metacognitive space, which is an ability to observe without judgment, with common sense, to observe what's going on and not to get entangled with it, not to, again, to overinterpret the story or the words or the narrative or the what if content, but to be able to say to yourself, oh, I'm doing that thing again. And then what happens is a change in how you handle your attention. So you're going to shift your attention from this rivet on the scary stuff to something else. But that is not the same thing as distraction, because distraction is one of those coping tools that backfires. And I'm going to try to explain the difference between shifting your attention and distraction with an example, because I think it's easier to see.
Yes.
Let's say you're driving in the car and you have a thought that's one you often have, which is, I don't feel so good. What if I turn the wheel and drive directly into traffic? And then your next thought is to hold on to the wheel more tightly. And you realize that you're making yourself more anxious by trying to control it. So then you try something else called turning on the radio. There's two ways to turn the radio on. One of them is, maybe if I turn the radio on, I'll stop thinking about that bad thought, that it'll block out the bad thought, that I'll feel better. So you turn on the radio and you listen hard to the music and the thoughts keeps coming, and then you're having a struggle. The other way to turn on the radio, which is exactly the same behavioral motion, you reach over and you turn on the radio, is this. While my mind is feeding me a bunch of garbage, I might as well leave that on channel 3 and listen to music. So I'm not trying to counteract or get rid of, I'm not intending for it to fix anything. I just might as well listen to music while part of my mind, which I know is completely nuts, hands me stuff that I'm just not going to pay much attention to. And it'll stop when it runs out of fuel, which it will whenever it decides to, but I'm not going to make it go away. I'm going to expect it, allow it, let it be there, and pay attention to something else. That's the difference between distraction and gently moving your attention while allowing, while accepting. Accepting doesn't mean, okay, now you have to be miserable and stuck with it. Accepting means, I'm not going to do anything about that. And the more I try to do something about that, the worse it gets. We know that. So I'm just going to leave that there and go over here.
Yeah.
It's an attitudinal shift that's very, very subtle because they both look like turning on the radio.
Yeah. And the word you said, and I use this a lot often, the word you kept repeating is while.
Mm-hmm.
While that you're uncomfortable. It's not instead of being uncomfortable or instead
Exactly.
of being anxious. You're using this word while. And I think that shift is the difference. And again, I agree with you. Like, it's funny because this is called your anxiety toolkit, but a lot of
Mm-hmm.
what we're talking about is using that while or the word and, that you have to still include the experience of anxiety or discomfort. And I love that. Is the attitudinal shift ever in your approach like a bring it on approach? Or do you more take a mindfulness, let's just observe what's present approach?
This conversation I've had with Reed Wilson 1,000 times. Um, I think there are two situations. One in which you there's an incidental emerging of anxiety. You start to feel anxious about something, and then you can practice a willingness to have the anxiety while making a firm decision to proceed forward and not to avoid. I mean, one of the things that we understand is that in that not deciding and not committing actually makes your anxiety worse, and making a firm commitment to do something no matter how you feel actually brings your anticipatory anxiety down. That oscillating, maybe I will, maybe I won't, keeps it much higher level than, okay, if I die, I die. So the willingness to proceed and the firm decision that you're not going to make the decision based on how you feel, but you've already made the decision, that makes a huge difference. So there's that kind of incidental practice where you just proceed forward. And then there's the bring it on. I'd like to get more confidence about this or that thing that I'm avoiding, where you deliberately challenge yourself to do more and more, or to take steps in that direction, or to be willing to experience that while keeping your anticipatory anxiety in the spot that it belongs. So I think there's places for both.
Right. Interesting. Okay. So let's say you're, a lot of people here are used to talking about facing a fear. We talk all the time about, identifying, let's say it might be a birthday party that you need to go to, or um, starting a job, or, facing and doing an exposure and so forth. And so that, let's say as you mentioned, it's scheduled for next Tuesday, but today is Monday.
Mm-hmm.
We are in this present moment experiencing anticipatory anxiety about that event. What might they, in addition to the attitude shift, what can they do today? How would today look, using these sort of mindset shifts to help them get through it, given that their brain's going to keep nagging them about the thing that's happening later or tomorrow?
The first thing is to identify that you are immersed in your imagination and you're treating your imagination as a warning or a prediction or a signal. And to identify that clearly, that you don't have any information about how it's going to go based on what you're feeling right now. It's not a predictor. So that your job is not to bleed until you're cut.
Good. I like that.
All right. So what you do is you change the what if to what is, which is not your imagination. It's what's going on right now, right in front of you, where nothing is going on. Where reality is you're sitting at the table, where reality is you're making your lunch, where reality is what's happening right now, where there's no danger. There's distress in your imagination, but there's no danger. And you shift your attention from the future to the present, to sensory experience. What's actually here? What do I see, smell? What's happening now? You withdraw energy from your worry. You stop planning, analyzing, working on problem solving, coming up with coping skills. You stop planning for it. You withdraw. That's the fuel that keeps it going, is all that thinking. So you withdraw that and you bring it back to the present moment, where you continue to make your sandwich and eat it. And the energy stays here in the present moment. So you also don't beat yourself up for having had anxiety, which is something people do, or shame yourself, or show yourself that you really can't do it because, so you don't draw conclusions. It's a very simple, but not easy to do experience. What happens is you don't suddenly start feeling better. You get little glimpses of what it means to be in the present moment and not in anticipatory anxiety. You get little glimpses. You get a moment in which you go, oh, I get it. Oh, this is what accept means. And then you go, what did I do to get that? And then you lose it immediately,
Yes,
right? Because
exactly.
this is passive. It's not active. It's not something you do. It's something you be. And it's very hard for people to get that it is an allow. It's a be here. It's not a thing to think or do or say. It's not a plan. It's not action. It's passive.
Yeah. Yeah.
And your brain is saying do something, and we're saying don't just do something, stand there, which is the exact opposite of the anxiety message.
Yeah. See, and I love this. So I know what my listeners are thinking, and I'm wondering if you could help us pull this apart. So you're giving us these concrete practices and this attention and this mindset and attitudinal shift of anxiety to respond to anxiety. And then the person who is, again, making their lunch, anticipating what may go on tomorrow, might also have some depression that's going to say this is going to go very badly, and it's the same thing is going to happen as last time, and you're going to go and you're going to screw it up, and you're going to have so much anxiety, and you're probably going to run away. Like, let's say there's a lot of hopelessness there as well. That's you're fighting with in your brain. Would you just apply the same skills to that mind, that thought, that message? Or in that case, how would you approach that when somebody is coming from a very negative place of this is just going to go bad?
Well, let's be clear. You used the word depression. I think we need to be clear when we're talking about demoralization, which is part of anxiety. And when we're talking about clinical depression, which means that your neurotransmitters are wacky and you can't experience any pleasure. So those are different. And you have to make that distinction. You can have depressed thoughts that are really just part of anxiety, or you can
Yes.
actually have the inability to experience pleasure, which makes anticipation of virtually anything dread.
Yes.
And so if you're really got clinical depression, you need to treat that very actively and first, which may mean medication, it may mean exercise, it may mean a full-on treatment of the depression. But at another level, the cognitive aspects of depression, the hopelessness kind of sense, can still be handled in a similar way, in that you have to make a distinction between actual hopelessness, where the situation is going to go badly, which is hopeless, and a hopeless feeling.
Yes.
which is not the same thing at all. A hopeless feeling is a symptom of depression. It's nonsense, feels completely real, feels like a prediction, feels like anticipation is you're accurately predicting. And
Yep.
yet a feeling of hopelessness has nothing to do with whether or not something is actually hopeless.
Yes. It's got that same theme in that it's sort of an imagination projection of what you think is going to happen. And
It's an absorption in the narrative or the movie that you just made, and an inability to realize you're sitting watching. It's not real
yeah,
because it feels really real.
yeah. That's a hard skill for people to be able to identify and have the awareness that they're in the story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, it's very hard for people to realize their own contribution to any of this. I mean,
Yeah.
people will often say things like, the grocery store makes me anxious. And my response to that is, wow, how does it do that? Because the sense is they don't see their own contribution to it. They don't
Mm,
see that it's my thoughts that I'm having in the
yeah,
grocery store that are making me anxious. It's just somehow you're being imposed on by the world. And
yeah,
so just even getting that point, is really important.
yes, yes. And to do
And
that
that
in a way,
those feelings can be caused just by your imagination. I will often do a behavioral experiment with people to show how powerful your imagination is on your body. Try this one. I want you to imagine very vividly a really ripe lemon. And now the really ripe lemon is cut in quarters, and one of those quarters is in your hand, and it's dripping. It's really ripe, and it's really thick, and it's full of juice. And now I want you to put that lemon in your mouth and bite down hard. Close your eyes and really bite down hard. What do you got?
I started salivating.
Right. And then when I ask people what causes the salivation, very often they will say the lemon. And I'll say, there's no lemon.
I thought you were going to use the activity where when someone tells you they have lice and you
Oh,
immediately
yeah, and
start
start
scratching your
scratching.
head.
Same thing. Same thing exactly. Yeah. Our
Yeah.
our thoughts are really powerful and they do affect our sensations and our experience. But your reaction to this was the one that I usually get from people, which is they start laughing.
Mm,
They see the absurdity of it. They can see what is going on when they create a story that makes them anxious and there's nothing happening. And
yeah.
so what you do is you practice understanding that in little bits.
Yes. 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 It's funny, as you said to bite down on the lemon, I felt my cheeks squint because I was thinking of how sour it was
Yeah.
going to be. That's such a powerful explanation, and it does really help us to see that imaginative piece of anticipatory anxiety, which I'm so
Mhm.
grateful for you sharing. I want to be respectful of your time, and I could literally, even what you said about the depression piece, I feel like that's a whole episode on its own. Like, there's just so many
Mhm.
pieces to this. But
Mhm.
in an effort just to keep this concise, can you tell us where people can hear about you, where they can find your books and all the great things that you're doing?
Well, there are four books written with Marty Seif. Three of them are self-help books. All the books are on Amazon. So if you just type my name in, they'll come up. The first book is on unwanted intrusive thoughts,
Good.
which is about obsession, basically about the um, the experience of obsession. The second one is called Needing to Know for Sure, and it's about compulsive reassurance and checking compulsion. So it's those two should be read in order.
Mm-hmm.
And the third book is Overcoming Anticipatory Anxiety, which is also about chronic indecisiveness and catastrophizing. They're all on Amazon. If you want a textbook, if you're a therapist, there is a textbook called What Every Therapist Needs to Know About Anxiety Disorders. It's a little bit older, but it's not that out of date, because a lot of what we come up with, we have sort of thought about for years.
Yeah.
But I would encourage, that's a Rutledge book. And that's also available. I think it's still on Amazon. I'm almost sure of that. And then if you just Google Marty or me, there's lots of podcasts and YouTubes and videos and webinars and all kinds of interviews that you can stumble into if you learn. All the books, by the way, are on both Kindle and audiobook. So it depends on how you like to learn things.
Amazing. And sometimes I like to listen and read at the same time. It really sinks in better that way. And so just to finish off, what would you like to sort of round out the conversation by saying is the most important thing for people to take away if they're experiencing anticipatory anxiety?
That's a good question. I think the most common thing that I run into where people are stuck is what I call paradoxical effort, which is where you're completely conscientious, you're applying everything you've read and thought about and looked at and every technique anyone has ever told you, and you're just trying and trying and trying to conquer, to fix, to struggle, to get right, and you don't feel any better. And if you are in that position where you are really working hard and you're courageous and you're exposing and but you just don't feel any better, it's likely that you're trying in the wrong way, and that your efforts are working backwards, and that what needs to happen is a different perspective and a shift in your attitude, and in a way, moving from active struggle to a kind of what we call therapeutic surrender, which is allowing part of your mind to be nuts and basically having that not matter.
Yeah. Yeah. You talked about like the do nothing approach.
Claire Weeks, who was my original teacher, she wasn't actually my teacher, but her ways of thinking way preceded ACT and, all of the things that we've learned about since. What she used to say about recovery is that recovery is not when symptoms no longer occur. It's when they no longer matter.
Yeah.
When they don't make you change your mind about what you're going to do, they don't take the pleasure away from what you're doing, they don't make you feel ashamed or angry or anything else. They just happen, they're no big deal, and you proceed. And I think that the struggle to get rid of is problematic.
Yeah, I agree. That's beautiful. Thank you so much. I'm so grateful for your time. Really, I am.
Well, it's been nice talking to you.